Well, again, I think you all know tonight is a special evening. I believe it was 3 weeks ago that many of us were at camp, and tonight is an opportunity for those that went to come and share what God has done, what God did during that week of camp. Very profound time for me, and I shared a little bit last Sunday. I'll share some more this coming Sunday, and certainly we'll hear some amazing things tonight, just the things that God has done. And so we want to give time for that here in just a moment. But before we dive into that, and I turn this over to Jacob and Laura, I just want to remind us of this verse in the book of James. It's one we quote often as it relates to camp. It's one that you are familiar with, but I just want to quickly bring it to mind again. And it says this in James chapter 1, verse 27, that pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their trouble and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. And this is obviously a verse that is very much connected to Royal Family and to camp, and I hope it's connected to your lives in other ways as well. But what we're going to hear tonight are people who lived this out, who put their faith into practice, and their religion in that sense became true, and it became powerful, and it became real. And I just want to encourage us towards that. You know, it's one thing to come together and sing and worship God here in kind of this enclosed space, and it's wonderful to do that as the body of Christ. But real worship takes place out in the real world. I mean, it takes place when we offer ourselves as a living sacrifice, and we surrender our will, and we put ourselves in situations that are costly and demanding of our time, and where we have to pour ourselves out, and that's what camp was for me. And I know for so many others, it was hard. It was a hard week. I mean, by the end of the week, that Friday, I mean, I was spent. There was nothing left in the tank. But I rejoiced that, you know what, nothing was left in the tank. I mean, that to me is a good thing. And so I just want to encourage you all. Those of you who've not been to camp, you know, I'm prayerful that this would inspire you, encourage you maybe, to get involved in one way or another, whether you go to camp or whether you just pray for it. We're going to have a mentoring program that's going to start up with the school year. And perhaps Billy will share some about that tonight. I don't know, but that's an opportunity for those that there's just no way to get away for a week at a time. You can come and you can pour out your life on a Saturday morning once a month. And so different opportunities, and we'll hear just some amazing things tonight. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jacob and Laura, and they will kind of take it from here.
Test. Whoa, there we go. Boom. Hey, good evening, everybody. My name's Jacob. This is my wife, Laura. We've had the privilege of working with Royal Family Kids Camp for 10 years now. The first 6 of those were in California, and the last 4 here in New Mexico. We're going to be inviting whoever wants to share who went to camp up. A couple things I wanted to say up front. Number one is there's a lot of sad things about when we deal with this demographic and talking about these kids, but this is, in some ways, I really want this tonight to be a celebration of the good things God has done. And there's a lot to celebrate, and there's a lot to be thankful for, and camp certainly is one of those things. Second, if you do decide to come up and share and you went to camp, please be sure to change the name and don't say anything that would identify any of the children for their protection. So we always want to... I usually always call any boy, I just call them all Jose because it just works. And so, we want to do that. So just a little bit from my experience, and then I'll hand it over to my wife, and then she can pass it out to that way. You know, one of the beautiful things, we're talking about what we celebrate about camp, and kind of to piggyback a little bit on what Phil was saying, one of the amazing things for me when I first went to camp, I was 33 at the time, and I was just super young, and at that time in my life, you know, I was trying to really like kind of figure out what is God's will for my life, what career does He want me to have, you know, and sometimes people are tackling big decisions in their life. Where does God want me to go to school, or who does God want me to marry, or how many times does God want me to brush my teeth a day? How much money should I give to church? Should I watch 3 hours of Netflix or just 1 hour of Netflix and 2 hours reading the Bible? And we spend a lot of time in our lives, you know, just kind of trying to get in the middle of God's will. And I remember that first time I went to camp, and really every time I've been to camp since, that's been an amazing part of the experience for me of going to camp is that you're in the center of God's will when you are at camp. Part of it, it's easy because we disconnect you, we unplug you, we take away your cell phones, we take away your life, we take you to somewhere else. But part of it's easy. I think what even more so is that there are, if you're a counselor, there are 2 kids that you have to take care of, and that's all that matters. Nothing else matters. Just take care of those kids. And it's a simple reduction, and I think that so many ways I learned at camp, what I've learned from camp over these 10 years is that God's will is not complex, it's very simple. And it talks about all over Scripture. God doesn't say, you need to go to this school, and you need to do this, and be this career, and whatever. God says, be joyful always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances. He says, do justly, love mercy, walk humbly. And those apply to anything. Whether you decide to go to Harvard or Calvary Chapel Bible College, Marietta, or whatever, and to me that was super freeing. That experience at camp, God just put it in my heart. It's like, just be today with your heart serving these kids. It was pure, and it was kind of just that verse. It says, talks about the purity of it, and there was just this freedom in that, and this purity, and like, oh, this is not complex. God's will is not complex for my life. It's actually very simple, and it really helped bring it to focus for me. Being on the leadership team, I'm going to give you a chance to talk in a minute. Being on the leadership team, we talked about this a little bit in our leadership debrief. I think it's kind of an interesting point, and maybe this will lead to some stories. But so the leadership team, before camp, we're spending months and months and months raising money and going to churches and twisting arms and trying to get people to come to camp and praying and twisting more arms and trying to find money and all these things over and over, and then recruiting the kids and all that stuff. And once you get to camp, the leadership team has I sometimes say my job is done once we actually get to camp. And this year we had a tremendous, God provided tremendously with our support staff, with our counselors, just wonderfully filled in some places where we had struggles earlier, and really had a really well-rounded team in all of our different areas that we really needed. Had experienced people coming back. It was great. Lots of experience, lots of new people that were helping out. And so at that point, the leadership team, the directors, we become what I call the shock absorbers. And so as that camp, if you can imagine, camp's kind of like a bus going down the road. It's a little journey. And so hopefully the road's nice and smooth. If the road's nice and smooth, then at camp, I'm just giving people high fives. And we can do a high five. I don't want to leave you hanging. I'm just giving people high fives and saying good job and talking to the kids, stuff like that. But if camp doesn't run smooth, then the leadership team becomes shock absorbers. And I know there'll be some fun stories about this, but there was a lot of vomit. There was lice. There were bed bugs. There was trips to hospitals. We had a lot of bumps in the road, but we were so blessed to have a fantastic leadership team to where we could keep that bus level so that the counselors, with the bumps, you don't feel them. I mean, you kind of feel them on a bus, I guess, but the shock absorber takes away the bumps so that the camp keeps going smooth for all the kids. And I'm really thankful for what a great team that God gave us. And I'm going to pass it on to Laura now. She might want to tell some of those bump stories.
No, I think I'll let some of you share some of those. But I just wanted to say this is really exciting. We've never had a chance to do this since Royal Family Roswell started, to have the church community together to just share stories. Because a lot of the stories from camp, like Jacob said, the children who come to camp, their identities are protected. So we don't bring home any pictures of the children's faces. We never, only our leadership team even has access to know the children's last names, where they are, that sort of thing. So it's for their safety, it's for their protection, and so it's neat that we're getting to do this with our church family and share more of the stories of camp with you. And we just ask that some of those things, it's we hate that we can't bring home pictures of like, look, this is me and my camper. But this is a way to remember what God has done, and that's really exciting. So thank you, Pastor Phil, for having that heart to do that. And for those of you who haven't been to Royal Family Kids Camp, I just want to say, before those of you who come up and start sharing, for me as a leader at Royal Family, one of the most amazing things, especially as the years have gone by, is just to see the volunteers, the adults that God brings to join him in this ministry. I mean, it's clearly, I mean, out of all the ministries I've ever been involved with, it's just so obviously God's work. I mean, the things that happen, it's just clear that this is divine intervention. And also it's very clear that Satan hates it, because there's things that go wrong there's just no other explanation except Satan hates camp. Sometimes at camp this year, I just had to walk around and tell some of our leadership team, guys, Satan hates us right now. Satan hates camp, and so just clean up that vomit. Let's do it. So chunky. Well, we don't need to talk about that. So anyhow, so it's really beautiful for me tonight to get to see those of you who did serve share your stories. But for those of you who haven't been to camp, I just want to put a little bit of context. I know a lot of you have heard about Royal Family. It is a camp that is really specialized in its design for children who have experienced abuse and neglect. But one of the things that is so amazing about it, how simple it is, Royal Family understands that 1 week at camp does not solve a child's problems who has been through so much trauma. 1 week at camp is the teeny part in this whole story of their lives. But the thing we get to do at camp that's so amazing is help children to have happy childhood memories that they can latch onto that help them through hard times in life. And when I think back about my own childhood, I think back, there are sometimes, like, for example, something this year that came up. This year we had this amazing thing at camp. We had some gentlemen from the Department of Game and Fish bring a fishing experience where the kids got to go fishing. Kind of like it was so amazing. Like the baptismal, but yeah, it was totally. It was like huge catfish in our baptismal. Thank you to Sean Denny. It was amazing. But the thing was, you see, this is a thing. Fishing is something you do not do if you do not have a loving parent who is with you, helping you, teaching you. And I thought this to myself, I only ever went fishing twice as a kid. My dad's not a fisherman. We're not fishing. But I remember those 2 times I went fishing. And for these kiddos, that's what we get to do at camp, is give them these happy childhood memories that they can latch onto, that anchor them in the love they experienced, the unconditional love of God, the messages they heard through experiences like this huge mouth catfish. I mean, they were huge. It was not, when they said they were bringing a tank, I was thinking like fish, but they were huge fish. Hopefully some of you guys will share your stories. It was amazing. So all that to say, for sometimes we tell stories about camp. Part of it is so fun because we are singularly focused on bringing joy and love into kids' lives. We're not complicating it with like, oh, we also need to teach them good table manners, and we also need to memorize 6 books of the Bible, and it's very simple: unconditional love of Christ and happy childhood memories. So one of my classic stories from camp is like, this was a couple years ago when a kid comes running past me. This was when we went to camp in California, and our camp had a pool. And this kid comes running past me after breakfast. He's like, "Hey, Aunt Laura, I just ate 17 pieces of bacon," or something like that. And I just like high five him. "Hey, great job," because 17 pieces of bacon, like that's what you do at Royal Family Kids Camp. And it wasn't like half an hour later that he comes running back down the pool, like, "Hey, Aunt Laura, I just barfed in the pool." And I was like, "Oh, high five." And it was like the happiest day of his life. He was so happy. Little 8-year-old, 17 pieces of bacon, the pool. So that's for me is like an anchor of like a Royal Family, like a joyful moment. So much fun. And so we're excited to hear from you all. There's a lot of you here that went to camp. I know some of you pastors and staff have talked to you about sharing. So if we want to just let someone come, or do you want me to call someone out? Come on. Cindy and Floyd? Michelle, you escaped. I was going to get Michelle Huckabee. Okay, you all take it away. Share some of your stories of what God did.
My name's Floyd Hunter, and it was my first year for being a counselor. and had no idea of what to expect. But I've been part of serving in church for a long time. So being part of ministry is normal. But asking me to be a counselor for this camp, I had my hesitations. Best week of my life. I was so blessed by all the other volunteers that were there. And what a joy it is to see that many people working together for a common cause of loving on these kids. What a blessing that is, that everybody was pouring out into that. And 5 hours sleep a night is fine. You can get by on that. But I was so blessed when Laura and Jacob just happened to be there whenever I needed them to take this guy up to see the nurse. It's like the way some things worked out were absolutely stunning. And I had some co-counselors that were just tremendous. New friendships that were made throughout that. And also with having the 2 kids, well, that was really nice to be able to love on those kids unconditionally, not expecting anything in return, just to love on them. But I got the bonus. I got to love on 6 kids and 2 other counselors. So if you want to really think about changing your life, become a part and engage in that activity.
And for those who don't know me, I'm Cindy, the other half of the Hunter clan. And this was my first time to be at camp. I was not a counselor. I was part of support staff. And support staff means that you get to support the counselors and the other support staff. So I had no kids assigned to me, which meant I had all the kids. Every time you walked by, that was your kid. So you got to love on that kid. Well, we had vomit. And what does not escape in that direction escapes another way. So we had that as well. And we had one little girl, and she was quite ill and had to go see the nurse. And all through the night, I thought about her off and on. So the next morning, I went to the nurse's station to ask about her. Well, she had been sent into quarantine just to make certain that no one else was ill, except there was another girl there, one that I had not met. And for some reason, God said, "Oh, ask if you can pray over her." So I asked the nurse, would it be okay? And she said, "Certainly, come right in." I went over, put my hand on her hand, which was across her tummy, put the other hand on her head as she was laying there, and leaned down just a little bit and prayed for her. My eyes were closed. When I opened them, when the prayer was done, I looked up. She had tears running into her ears and said, "Nobody's ever done that for me before." Well, I know for a fact this was not the first time this child had been sick. And to have the honor to be the person that got to pray for her when she was sick is something I can never forget. So I want to tell you, if God puts it on your heart, there will be many experiences that you will keep with you, but there'll probably be that one thing that God will give you. So I walked out of the nurse's station, and I went around the back side of the building and leaned up against the wall and cried my eyes out. because I had had such a privilege. So if you want to be blessed, you cannot bless as much as you are blessed. It just doesn't happen. So think about it. Pray about it. Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you, guys. Come on up. Don't be shy. Mimi.
Well, that's a tough act to follow. So, welcome to the tea party, and we're going to form a circle, and we're all going to sing I'm a Little Teapot. Do you know that song? I don't know it, and I don't want to learn it. Well, that's all right. You don't have to. This little boy, earlier in the week, I had to hold him in the gym waiting for his counselor, and he was angry. He was very angry. You hate me. You hate me. I was like, no, I don't hate you, buddy. Just trying to keep you safe. And he was acting out a lot, more than I had seen. I've seen this child because he came to club. So I had seen him every month from September through, or whenever it was, through May. And I was like, this is not like him. He's not that defiant. He's not that angry. Something is going on. What is going on with this kid? And the counselor, not the counselor that has two kids, but the therapist, thank you, said, well, 2 weeks before camp, they took him out of the home where his brothers were. You know, I would be angry too if that happened to me. And let's see, Michael's not here, is he? So Michael was his counselor, and he was angry, and he was certain that we hated him, and he's just feeling that. But then by the end of the week, when he's getting on the bus, Michael said, "Why do you think everybody's crying? Do you see that?" He said, "Because they love me." So he did get it, but it was a challenge for little Jose. Okay. This was my third year at camp. I went the first 2 years, and then the third year I had a conflicting time. I went to a training for work instead, and I missed that week so much. Just the week of being bathed in prayer and giving everything, and that's part of the reason that I came back. I mean, I have learned that it's really a bad idea to say it never or always, because God will prove you wrong. But I'm going to do what I can to go as often as I can. The first 2 years, I had some trouble moving around. My knee it wasn't bad. I could go up and down the stairs. It just took me a little longer than everybody else. And this year, after some physical difficulties, when a couple of days I just could barely move, but through the power of prayer and people praying for people who are going to go to camp. But this year at camp, I was able to run up and down those mountains and up and down the stairs, no pain, just better than I ever was before. And that was a blessing that God gave me. I guess it's because of that. I don't know. I don't know that there's necessarily a balance in all that. Another thing that I remember, one of the years I was doing the crafts, and I had 3 or 4 different crafts that I had set up. We had some duct tape. You could make a wallet or a pen, and some yarn, and you could make, different things, or a backpack. And this white boy came up and said, "I want to make a pair of gloves." I was like, okay. Because one of the things they tell us in training is, if it's not harming anybody, you should say yes as much as you can. Because these kids don't get anybody saying yes to them. So we made that young man a pair of silver duct tape gloves. It was awesome. And the last thing I wanted to share with you was, and this again, it was a couple years ago, and they have a zip line at camp, and I have this unreasonable fear of heights. And one of the little girls said, Mimi, well, do you trust God? I said, yes. Then why are you afraid of the zip line? I was like, wisdom from children. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Two quick comments on this one particular young man that we had this year at camp. It was a great story of God's grace. He did some things that warranted being sent home from camp, and that's pretty difficult to get sent home from a row of family kids, and even in that, it was that first night, and I was just one of like 4 crises that were happening, and I was really thankful that as a team we decided to just stick it out, and I went to his counselor and said, hey, this is very difficult. He said no, he needs to stay. And then the support staff, therapists, they all stepped up, and that particular kid this week needed basically 2 adults' attention all the time. We were blessed that we had the resources God given and it was these divine appointments that God creates at camp. You know, He had people there that needed to be there, Paul Moya. Some of you have met him. He's from Albuquerque, and he was our dean of men, and he and I would tag team, kind of trying to be an assistant with this kid, and so sometimes this kid would get upset and mad, and he would try to set you off or do something that would shock you. And so at one point he gave Paul Moya the bird. And then Paul said, oh, that's really good. You can count to 1. Now can you count to 2? So it was an interesting intellectual challenge with this boy, but we loved him a lot, and I'm just so thankful that God provided what we needed to make it through camp, and that he was able to have a good experience, and that he now has that it's that unconditional love that he was fighting against the whole time. And so many of our kids do this in their own way. That unconditional love, he's fighting against that love the whole time. But now he knows there are people in the world who love him unconditionally, because he tried every way to make us not love him. He did. He really did. So, okay, next volunteer. Come on up. Cowboy Randall, one of our camp favorites. So there's some great pictures if you get to see the video on the website of the girls playing with his mustache, it's hilarious. So.
I'm Randall Jones, and it was a privilege just to be there. You know, it was just to see God at work, and it's amazing that He could even use me. But you know, there was 2 times I was of 2 different kids I was going to talk about that. Well, see, I kind of headed a leather craft projects that I get to see every kid that came through. And there was the first day, I guess before I even seen any kids, there was at lunchtime, right before lunch, we was waiting for lunch, and this little girl walked up to me, and I remembered her from the year before, and she says, I found something of yours. And she had a leathercraft tool, a stamping tool, that she had found at the aunt and uncle station, and that's where I was the first year, 4 years ago. And I remember losing this tool. It was of a flower, a stamping tool the stamp on leather of a flower, and she was just so proud that she could found this and should give it to me, you know, and we just kind of had a close bond the whole week, and then there was another boy. I guess after the second night, we had a lot of the support staff did a night relief for the counselors, that we would go from 8 to 11, you know, to give them relief, you know, for relaxation, have a meeting, and just to be away, you know, by themselves. And I was assigned this one cabin, and actually Zora told me it was going to be another place, but then she switched it, and it was a perfect place. I mean, the Lord just was amazing. I know the first cabin would have been one good too, but there were 6 boys in there, and you just have a bond because you see them, you spend time with them. It's a little small area, you know. It's just 8 bunks and a little narrow walkway between them, you know. But one of the boys, you know, I was pretty close to all of them, that you could, you know, see them every day, talk to them, and but I guess and this is nothing that was really done by me, but like the first night, you know, I just asked one of them, you know, if I could read his Bible to everybody, you know, when they finally got in bed and was ready to relax, you know. So I opened his Bible and I read John chapter 1 to him, and we just had a good discussion on, you know, the Jesus is, you know, is the Son of God, and you know, and it's just it was amazing. And the second night there was. Well, the first night, the counselor stayed in there, and the second night is when I did that. Then the third night, one of the guys that was a helper, you know, relief counselor, he played his guitar, you know, and sang them to sleep. And then the third night on Thursday was when they had a birthday party. And during that day, I think during chapel, there was this one boy that was in that room, and he kind of was having a hard time. He was having kind of a meltdown. He was crying, and he went off by himself, and I kind of went over to him, and I tried to comfort him and talk to him, and, you know, he just wanted to hold his head down. And I pulled some paper out of my pocket, and I wrote a note to him about that God loved him and he cared for him, and you know, and I told him that I did too, you know, that I cared for him, and he kind of put his hand on it, and he kind of looked at it, and he put it down, and then I would just, he wouldn't ever look up or say anything, but then I just noticed every once in a while he would look to see if I was still around, you know, so I just kind of stayed where he could see me, and then that night, or later that evening, that's when they had the birthday parties. They have a birthday party for each kid. It's all at the same time, and they all get a cake and presents, and that night in relief in the cabin, you know, all the kids were just going wild over their toys and their games and things, and but this one boy that I was talking about, he was in the top bunk right by the bed, and that's all. Every night I'd stand right there most of the time, and he was pretty quiet, and he was the first one to go to bed, and he just, you know, and he'd always be the first one to sleep every night too. But I asked him, could I read to him out of his Bible, and he said yes. And he told me where it's at, and there was 2 Bibles there. His counselor had both kids' Bibles there, so I opened it to see you know, if it was his, and he had that note that I'd given him. It was in the front of his Bible. And that just really touched me. And so I told him I was going to read John chapter 3 to him. And all the other kids were busy. They wasn't wanting to listen. They were still trying to get their baths and get ready for bed, but still mainly playing. And so I was reading John chapter 3 to him, and about when it's talked about Nicodemus and Jesus talking to Nicodemus and saying, you know, you must be born again. And I told him that's like the Holy Spirit coming over a person, you know, the Holy Spirit of God, and it changes you from a bad person to a good person. And what he said to me was, he says, that's just like in the movie, I Can Only Imagine. And that just, that melted my heart. I said, yes, it's like that little boy's dad that was so mean and angry, you know, but God changed him. You know, and it's more what these kids did for me, you know, than me, whatever I could do. But it's just so touching, you know. And then we talked about that movie and about how that man was changed.
Something that he mentioned that I just always is a really amazing part about camp. And I don't, someday, if I ever had time, I'd do some sort of behavioral study on it. But the words, I love you, so simple, so basic, it's so profound. It means so much to these kids to hear it from an adult over and over all week long. It's powerful, and it just reminds me that, you know, God is love. God is love. And when you tell them, I love you, you're giving them that. You're giving them Christ. So who else would like to share? Come on up. All the way from the cheap seats in the back.
Hi. So I feel like my experience at camp was a little bit different. I had little girls in my cabin. So, you know, all week a lot of people are having these in-depth conversations with the kids, learning about their lives, and I got to be mom all week. A lot of time chasing children and kissing boo-boos and just trying to help them get through the entire day. There was one day, and of course, Mom, I'm sorry for never peeing when I had the chance, because I get that now. Oh man, do you have to go now? No. Of course, the minute you get as far away from a bathroom as possible, at least one of them has to go, and you're just like, okay. It was really fun working with these little girls and how much personality is wound up in these little packages. And there was one day, though, and had a bathroom emergency where this little girl is running up the hill really fast. And, of course, she loses her step and slips and falls, you know, kind of skins up her knee, most traumatic thing ever. So we're trying to, hobble her back, and it's just she's screaming and crying, and I'm like, oh, man. So I scoop her up, and I end up hiking up this hill. And I should be doing cardio before, you know, prepping for camp if I would have known. And we finally get her into the nurse, you know, and as soon as they slap a Band-Aid on it, she's okay. But it's just, such this great experience of understanding what real unconditional love is for kids that you don't really know, for people. I mean, you're a stranger to these kids, basically, and then all of a sudden, you just have so much love that you can't even explain. And we had one of the little girls that had lice, and I remember that we kind of got prepped for that, hey, by the way, it's oh, okay, yeah, I can handle that. And the first morning we were getting ready, I'm brushing her hair, and I see the lice, and I'm like, this is what loving Jesus is about. Because, oh man. There's just, I can't explain the type of ways that God works through you, because I'm going to tell you, that was not me standing there brushing that little girl's hair as I watched lice run through it. That was not me at all. And it wasn't me hiking that little girl up the track when that's not me. So it's just a really great experience in that sense. And my youngest girl, she was little. And, by Tuesday, Wednesday, she started calling me mommy. And it's like one of those things, like, obviously, these kids have some, like, attachment issues, and they don't know how to handle it. And then by Friday, one of the other girls in our cabin was like, raise your hand if you don't want to go home. And my little one, she's like, we're already home. So this sweet little girl, at first, it breaks your heart. Obviously, this little girl bounces from home to home. She just thinks that this is her new family, her new foster care. And at first, like I said, it just destroyed my heart. And then you just kind of stop and look back, and it's like, we got to be home to this little girl. I got to be someone that she looked at as mom, somebody that loved her unconditionally, and all these kids around her that were so kind to her and so loving, all the other support staff that chased her down when she got hyper. And it was just such a blessing to be able to give that type of love to kids that way. So.
Thank you for that story there, Michaela. Now all of our heads are itching. She was treated. She had already been treated for lice, but it had a resurgence at camp. I love that story, Michaela. That cabin this year, we just had this cabin of just teeny tiny little girls. They were 5 and 6, and for me particularly, Jacob and I started doing this camp before we had kids, and so it felt a lot different than it did now that I have my own 6-year-old little girl at home. And one of the first nights of camp, long story, but I ended up in the emergency room in Ruidoso with one of the little girls from this cabin, little 6-year-old girl. She was teeny tiny, and carried her in. She was not. It's a long story. She was not ill. It was nothing threatening, but for safety's sake, we needed to take her in to be checked out. But as I carried her in, it's just unexplainable type of like mother reaction to be carrying a little girl. She's the age of my daughter, a lot smaller. But I know we were celebrating the great things that God did, but something that was just particularly heartbreaking to me this year, that the heartbreaking things are important to remember because it motivates us. How does the Lord want us to continue to keep these children in our lives every day? How do we integrate the compassion and the James passage? How do we integrate that into our everyday life? And so this little gal, I had the privilege of calling her foster parent to tell her foster parent that we were taking her to the emergency room. And that was it was a difficult conversation. But I think for me, the more difficult part was that after the parent realized that it was not a big deal what was happening, that the parent never followed up with me. Then, the next morning, I called and just tell her everything was fine, and I just left a message. I never got a call back. The rest of the week, no call back about it, no question. And I just thought, it just kind of was, for me, just to say, if this had been my daughter, I'd been up in the car up there, I'd been yelling at me. If it was my daughter, I'd have been in my face. What is going on? What, and so it was an important reminder. Why do we do what we do? Because children need a voice. They need somebody to love them. They need someone to stand up for them. And that is what the Lord asks us to do. So, sorry, but that cabin, they were just so little darlings. Okay, who else? I know we have a lot more I want to get through. Anyone? Okay, Cowboy Randall, I just want to say when he's up here talking, again, I say this, if you come to Royal Family, anything, you hear me say this, but I love having Cowboy Randall at camp. And this year we also had Charles, who is like Cowboy Randall light. But it's so awesome because the children in general in our society, as you know, they do not have strong, loving, godly men in their lives enough. You know, their teachers are women, their social workers are women. They have a lot of women in their life. And to see not just some unconditional Christian person telling them they love him, but a strong, godly man with the mustache and the height and that is different. And they get to, I love that. I love it. It's something I cannot do. So, Doug, James, Michael, who wants to talk? Michael. Michaela. Just kidding. What? Oh, yes, you all were not here when we talked about, but just remember, no names.
Yeah. So, sorry, I haven't actually thought about this. I forgot about it until like 45 minutes ago when I realized I had to take a shower and run over here. But I would like to talk about, and this is a less happy story, but as Laura said, those are some of the most important ones. I obviously had a little bit of a rambunctious kid this year. I think that has been mentioned. I knew him before camp, outside of camp, and the moment I heard I had him, I was excited, but I was a little scared because my interactions with him, I have to tell you one because it's hilarious. He was trying to hit some kids, and just like kids that were around, and I was like, hey, dude, this is outside of camp. I was like, hey, dude, you can't just hit people. And he's like, you don't love me. I was like, what does that mean? He was like, well, if you loved me, you'd let me do whatever I wanted. And I was like, that's not true at all. And then he also said, I was like, well, would Jesus hit people? And he's like, well, he hit me first. I was like, but would Jesus hit people? And he said, and he sat there and thought for a little bit. And he's, well, if somebody hit Jesus, he would send them to hell. And kicking their butt is basically the same thing. So yes, Jesus would hit them. So he's like the most incredibly intelligent kid of that age I've ever dealt with. And so he was just very funny. So Jacob mentioned the very first night, I believe, there was a bit of a meltdown, lots of meltdowns. One of the things that first, since camp isn't like therapy, right? You don't necessarily want to push in on these issues. For the first 2 days, I was kind of being, I don't know, I was doing it even though I probably shouldn't have. But one of the things I do like about having pushed is that it kind of sometimes would reveal things underneath them, why they were getting angry. And one of the things he said is, you guys don't love me, you just pretend like you love me. And so I think for a lot of these kids, as Mimi mentioned, he had just been taken away from his siblings. And for me, like growing up, I had 7 siblings, and that was really, amidst the craziness that is my family, that was always a bit of a, it's just like, despite the fact that we're all disorganized, everything's running everywhere, we love each other, and our siblings, we stick together, and that is so incredibly important to me. And so for a lot of these kids, you realize that that's all they have. They don't have parents. And so for me to see those kids at camp without that always just broke my heart. And then conversely, when I'd see them despite having these, because the dynamic inevitably is going to change whenever you have parents that aren't there or parents that have been abusive. So that's going to change. But whenever you see a cohesive sibling unit, that was always great. But whenever you wouldn't see that, as in the case of this young boy, that was really tough. Wow, I'm going all over the place. I'm really sorry. So, but the mainstay of what I was wanting to talk about is even those relationships in his life where love is supposed to be foremost, and that's supposed to be the bedrock of who he is. There isn't that love there, and even amongst these siblings. And I don't want to go too deep into it, but on the way, well, geez, none of the Okay, I'm going to leave that. But I'm really sorry. I should have thought about this a little sooner. These kids didn't quite understand what was going to happen to them in terms of being separated. I understood that, and so I tried to get these boys to interact with each other. And you could see that they just didn't want to. And that was because there was a lot of anger and hatred, and so for this boy, once he realized what was going to happen, I was there when he realized about the family being separated, the siblings. He just broke down and said, "I don't want to leave my brothers," even though this whole week there had been antagonism there and there hadn't been a desire to get together. And so this, realistically, and he got picked up by the state. When we dropped him off, a state car picked up, and he realized what was going to happen, and he just started crying and saying, "I don't want to leave these people," listing off people, and I didn't know what to say to him. And so, right now, he is around a bunch of people he doesn't know, never seen before in his life before 2 or 3 weeks ago, and who knows how long he'll be there. And not that I don't begrudge the state for doing that. I guess what I begrudge is the fact that I think it's just, I don't know. What if there had been a different car there to pick him up? He needs incredible attention. I think, obviously, I don't want to get up here preachy about society, whatever, but what we like to do is, I think Americans, we are very generous with our money compared to most other societies, but I think we like to throw money at things and say that'll be fixed. But you can't fix a family with money. You can't fix a broken heart with money. And so, this idea where, Uncle Sam will take care of them for me. That's my money's going towards them. That doesn't really work there. And I know there are people here that give and invest into these children's lives, but one of the things that has really been on my mind in regards to this particular thing, people always say, "Oh, I love Jesus, not religion." And it's sure, whatever, it's semantics, doesn't matter. But I don't know, maybe don't be so quick to forego religion, because what it says in James, "Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction." And I don't know, I don't want to be up, because obviously although this week of camp is good, this week of camp is not something that these kids need sustained love, and I don't know if I'm capable or even willing to give that, so I don't want to stand up here as a judge, but maybe as an encourager, just if we aren't doing that, then what are we doing? If we aren't, I don't know, what is he saying? Micah, I think. I don't want your burnt offerings. I don't want your songs. Stop singing those things to me. That's not what I want. He wants us to, what is pleasing to him, seek justice, love mercy, walk humbly with our God. What is God in his holy habitation? This is God. Wow, I forgot what it was. This is God. I'm sorry. Something about protecting the orphan, the widow. I'm sorry. But that's what God wants. That's what's pleasing to him. And that's what is really our foremost duty. So I'm really sorry this was rambling. But when you see these kids go home to be picked up by the state, they're not going to get picked up by their parents. That's something we'll never get rid of. The poor you will have with you always. But who is currently working to address that need? And that just is so anti-fundamental. The amount of Christian power there should be in this nation, resource-wise and people-wise, it should not be the state picking this up. So that's just something I got to see while I was at camp.
We got time for maybe one more. Come on up. This is Tabitha. Tabitha will be taking over directing the camp starting next year. We're excited for that. So she's this. If you've been all 4 years here or three, this is 3 years. So she's awesome. Here she is.
Thank you. Whew. Camp is life-changing. Been praying, asking God to put on my heart and the words to come out of my mouth, because you think of so many different things. But I kind of want to give you some peace. That particular child is doing very good right now. So if that gives you some peace. That particular Jose is one of thousands. It is very disheartening to know how many we have just in Chavez County, in our state, and how it can change. But camp is a week where kids get to be a kid, and they don't have to worry about anything. As somebody said earlier, we want to say yes if it's not going to hurt the kids. I have the pleasure of working and seeing some of these kids as well in a different setting, and having them run up to you and, I know you from camp, and it gets very exciting. But go, okay, what was your favorite thing? The zip line or the swing. That was some of the ones I've heard this week. Tea party. All of them, leatherworking. Each of them have said something that is important, and they take that with them. And the smart Paul Moya, that's not here right now, said something at training a couple years ago about going in with an unguarded heart. And it stuck with me, because you have to go in with an unguarded heart. Don't go with any expectations other than just to love these kids. And sometimes, as little Jose that they're talking about earlier, sometimes it's difficult. And we have to put ourselves in check and remember that God is using us for them. Most of us, one of the big things is birthdays. As Cowboy Randall mentioned earlier, they get a birthday. Some of these kids seriously have never had a birthday before. They've never had a present. Cindy talking earlier about being prayed most. Some of these kids have never been prayed for before. What they didn't know is they were being prayed for long before they got to camp. And they will never know that. They won't know that they were loved during camp, before camp, and after camp. And to kind of speak to what Michael says, everybody has a talent, and some people give money because that's their talent. I mean, it's easy. I use this example. You have a potluck at your work. Some people love to cook, and you like them to cook or bake, but some are like, here, let me give you $10. If you go buy this stuff, I'll do it. Everybody has their talent, and I think it's important, and Jacob and Laura mentioned that earlier. There were so many things that came together this year at camp, even with the devil hating us. There was some tremendous spiritual warfare this week, or that week at camp, more so than even the last 2 years I've been there, and I think even prior to the year before. Which means, in my way I see it, is there's something fantastic came out of that camp that we don't know yet. Because the devil was on his toes. He had everything he could do to try to fight us, and I think at the end, we won. I just got goosebumps. We won. Our God won, using us. And so, I talk about this as my 3rd year at camp, and I didn't know going into it either. I had worked with some of the kids going into it my first year. Camp changed my life. We talk about us blessing the kids, but what they do to us, even at that moment, is something that you can't put into words. And sometimes the way they bless us doesn't come right away. It comes down the road. Maybe a week later, it could be a month later. After my first year, my husband, who actually brought those big fish, so thank you. I know he doesn't like being called out, but I think it's important that, as Laura mentioned earlier, some of those kids have never been fishing, and they loved it. Not one complaint, same thing with birthdays and doing that kind of thing. But One of the years, other than this year, I was the mad scientist. Loved it. I hate science, but I loved being the mad scientist. Just saying. Any science teachers or anybody in here, I'm just saying. But coming up with the experiments, and so we were out at Lee Lake at Bottomless Lakes, and he was doing a presentation. I remember sitting there and some of the kids walk up, and one of the things that we can't approach the kids. So it's really important. So unless the kid approaches us, because we don't, it's that confidentiality. We don't want them to know. So I see this young boy and girl, they're sisters, and they both have been at camp. And I see him, and so I'm not saying anything. Next thing you know, I hear him going, Mom, because they happen to be back with their parents at this point. Mom, that's the mad scientist. And so they get all excited. So that was pretty cool for me, for them to remember that. So there's ways that we don't know that we make a difference in these kids' lives. Pray, just so you guys can put it in your calendars or your phones, iPhones, tablets. July 7th next year is camp, so you can write it in your calendar so that you kind of prepared. I'm going to use Cindy, and I'm going to use Pastor Phil as an example. I had the honor last year of giving them a tour of camp. And I love it, because Jacob's like, hey, I need you to give a tour. Okay, let's go walking. So I took him around and stuff. And Pastor Phil and I talked about this, as well as Cindy, is we can sit here and tell you about camp and how awesome it is. We can watch the video. Doesn't do it justice. Until you're totally immersed in it and you see it from a totally different view, do you realize what an impact that you make on these kids' lives and what they do to us? Camp literally forever changed my life. And we will never know what camp did to some of these kids. Billy will know some because he works with these kids outside of camp. Those who are in the mentor club, me with my other job, I have that opportunity and privilege to see some of this stuff. And so what you do, you may never know until years down the road. But it's important to know that what you're doing does make a difference. And every year it changes. And I think I go back to how many things kind of fell into place this year and how awesome it was with people with doing positions and doing things like that and having camp. I wish we didn't have this camp. I wish there was not a need for this camp. But it is. We do need it. And so we need to make the best of what we can do. And that means if you need to pray, you pray. If you want to come, Miss Angela did an awesome job at our welcome home. We had somebody come take care of the birthday, get everything set up for the birthday party. Everybody has a role, and it takes an army. You always say it takes a village to raise a kid. It's kind of like the same thing to put camp together. Everybody just gets together and does it. It's a team effort. It's not a one-person thing. But most of all, I'm grateful to have camp. I'm grateful to work with these kids, and I've met some amazing people that I now call friends, and I get to call them my family. That is a pretty awesome thing to have. And to be around people who love God. I remember growing up, you are who you hang around. It is. Amazing what God can do to you, and start loving people and being around that and loving kids and finding that unconditional love, even when you have that moment like, I don't think so. I use Michaela like, yeah, this isn't me. And there was a lot of puking, and we won't discuss the chunks. And some of them stepped up, and that was the amazing thing. And some of them that stepped up weren't moms, and that was pretty good. Being a mom, yeah, I didn't step up. I'll just, right there. But it was amazing. And for people to pour their heart out, like these two people in the front row. And I know they don't like accolades, but I'm giving them accolades anyway. But God brought them to this and to get this started in New Mexico, and I think that's an amazing thing. Don't fight what God has planned for you. Because I promise whatever He has for you, there's nothing you can do to change it. It's going to happen. Might as well just make life easy and go, okay, God, what you want? Okay, let's go do it. because I promise you it works a lot easier and life's a lot happier. But, you know, if you have questions, ask any of us. But please consider praying. You know, anybody else, put it on your heart to see. We always need, camp always needs volunteers. Thank you. I'm being Jacob, or Laura, actually Laura. I wanted to tell one quick story, and it reminded me of Michaela's story, and I was going to talk about it when I came up here and got all sidetracked. There was a little girl who'd been to camp. This was her second, maybe her third year, for sure her second year. And we had a night where she was crying. And so I had to go to the cabin. I'm like, what's up, bud? And she's like, just kept crying. I'm like, okay, I can't hear you. You got to stop crying so I can understand your words. I don't think I get to come back to camp next year. Okay, why? And it's hard because in your mind you're like, I don't want you to come back to camp. I want you to know that you're going home with you're not telling them, so you want them to be home with their family. But I'm like, how do you know? She's like, because my mom, I'm going back with my mom. Well, when are you going back with your mom? Next year. Okay, well, we still got some time. But she won't drive. They can't drive. We live in Albuquerque. We won't drive. Well, let's just pray and see what happens. And so it's one of those things that we don't want to make promises to these kids, but when they want to come back to camp, they're excited about coming back every year. They look forward to it. For the first couple weeks, like I'm getting to the point now I'm already excited for camp again. We're not quite, usually a couple weeks after, a month after camp, we're like, and then we're like, okay, let's do it, let's ready. So just those kids look forward to it too, and having that week of feeling that unconditional love that we can give them.
Thank you. Well, guys, we're just about out of time. You know, one of a lot of people really love the beginning of the week where the buses come and the signs, and you guys hopefully have seen the video. And if you haven't, go on the website and watch the video. You can see that first part. You know, a really special part of the week for me is when the kids get on the bus and leave, and it's definitely sad, but it's a good goodbye. And it's an amazing experience every time that I've been through that and seen that goodbye that these kids rarely ever get, the good goodbyes. You've heard a lot of great stories tonight. Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing. I'm going to turn it back over to Phil now, if you're ready. And I think we're going to just spend some time in prayer and one more song.
Guys, you've heard some cool testimonies, and it's fitting for us to end in prayer tonight. So let's take just a few minutes. We're aiming to close here in just a few minutes, but let's take just a few moments to close in prayer. I'm going to ask you to, those that want to, you can break up in groups. You can pray with somebody nearby. If you're not comfortable with that, please, no pressure here. But let's go before the Lord and pray. Let's pray for the kids, those that were here at camp or attended camp, the seeds that were planted. Pray for that, and then pray for the volunteers, those that got to serve, that God began a work in them and in me. You can pray for me. And the others. And then pray for leadership at camp. And just as you just heard, there's going to be a transition. Tabitha's going to kind of be taking it over as the director, so pray for her. And let's just take a few quick minutes. Let's bring this before the Lord before we close tonight.